UNT political science professor Kimi King, thank you so much. Your reaction to the fact that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been elected president-elect and vice president-elect.
It's not such a surprise. It's been coming for a few days, probably since Thursday, when you saw them dig deeper into the ballots that needed to be recorded and counted, especially those mail-in ballots and absentee ballots coming in. So as that margin continued to grow that Biden had over President Trump, there was a recognition that sometime this weekend, there would be a cross over the finish line of the Electoral College. But remember, President Trump has a series of legal cases that he has lodged in specific states regarding the overall vote count. And so this will not be over until we get through the courts.
And the president has the right to file the legal challenges. I'm wondering, because of all this, because it's Saturday, the Saturday after the election, what does that say about, because last night Joe Biden talked about a mandate. Well, what's your thought about that and the impact now that it, does the timing at all change anything?
So I think it'll be difficult to talk about a mandate until we see that overall popular vote count and to see how some of these different states ultimately shake out when they have finally concluded their votes and then what the courts weigh in on. You have to remember that in terms of a mandate, it depends not only on the size of what you've won, but the extent to which you have support in the legislature. And so one thing viewers need to keep watching is for how the rest of these states, especially their U.S. Senate races, shake out and what the ultimate divide is in the U.S. House of Representatives. Those are all going to be factors going forward before either a Democrat or a Republican can claim some kind of mandate.
What do you think was behind and the driving force for the Democrats to retake the White House?
I think that they recognize that in the 2016 election, if you look closely at what everybody's been calling the blue wall, right? Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those states, if you look back in retrospect, the margin was always very razor thin there for President Trump when he came in. The way the Electoral College works is that it's each state making a decision about who they want. And so while we have a popular vote, you have to really look across each state and see who has control of each of those state houses, which can make a difference if we get into some kind of Electoral College battle, which President Trump has indicated he might try to do. So that's another thing that you'll want to be watching for as that we move forward in the next week, and the language that both sides use regarding whether or not they're going to challenge this. What the Democrats did right this time was that they mobilized in the wake of the 2018 election, and they saw an increase in certain states, and then they began to target those states for the 2020 election. So in that sense, they did that right through ads, through small donors, that they raised a tremendous amount of money. What they didn't do right about it was how they allocated that money. I think the Democrats will be looking back for a long time saying, did we spend that money wisely on ad campaigns, or should we have used it more to mobilize voters, say, for example, in the Rio Grande Valley, where actually Democrats did worse this time around? So those are the things they need to be watching for.
I was just going to ask you if you were referring to all of the ad money that we saw from Democrats in Texas, and yet they have really nothing to show for it at all.
Yeah. So we often speak in political science of the incumbency effect and this idea that we tend to support the same people over and over again. And that really is the case here, that you saw some of that incumbency effect. While people may not have been as supportive of President Trump, his margin here was more narrow this time around. That doesn't mean that they necessarily were willing to reject the rest of the Republican candidates that were out there. And so that'll be something that the Democrats have to think about going forward. And they're going to be looking at places like Georgia and North Carolina, places in the Sun Belt where it does look like they were able to make some inroads, but they're going to have to be a lot smarter about about how they're spending that money. In political science, we usually say again that, you know, money buys you love, but in this election cycle, money did not buy the Democrats love in Texas.
What do you think the significance is of the fact that Joe Biden did win in Tarrant County?
It's a continuation of a trend that you're seeing around the urban areas, and particularly in this election, what both Republicans and Democrats are going to be talking about for quite some time is the role of the suburban voter and how we think about demographics, that you can't assume that all white suburban women are going to vote in this monolithic category for one particular candidate, nor can you assume that everyone in the Latinx population is going to, you know, just because you identify as Hispanic does not mean that you're necessarily a Democrat. So I think that what you see in Tarrant County is this recognition that the population is becoming more complicated and sophisticated in how it sees the voting process, and that they may be strategically choosing among different kinds of races and parties where they're going to throw their support.
One more question, and that was, you talked before about the other Sunbelt states, and obviously with Arizona and Georgia, which had been Republican states in the presidential elections in the past, have now flipped blue. And so I'm wondering, Texas is not there yet, obviously, but how quickly do you think that could change?
So I think everybody's been talking about that since 2006, and it hasn't happened yet. What you really want to watch for is this process going forward of how they draw the lines after the census that we just had in 2020, because that 2022 legislative cycle is going to be really important, and it depends on how well they are able to position themselves for the 2022. Be careful about blue waves or red waves, because everybody thought that Alabama might potentially be going that way, and it simply did not. And, you know, people had discussed North Carolina being one that would flip, and it doesn't look like it's going that way either. So you really have to watch for those statewide races in those states that you think are going blue or going red, because they're the real indicators. And so far, what the Democrats have done here is they've made the areas surrounding the urban areas a whole lot more purple. But purple isn't necessarily blue. So stay tuned, because the red is not giving this up yet in Texas.
All right, UNT political science professor Kimi King, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
You betcha, and thanks for watching CBS 11.
All right, thank you so much.